heard the noise before.
Don't have enough time. Tired to work out.
But the truth is,
Can't make it to the gym.
Fit
Wondering what to wear.
doesn't
Don't have a face.
care. Fit doesn't care why you move, as long as you move for the things that matter. It doesn't care about the rules, about the spotlight, and it definitely doesn't care about barriers. You want to train there? In those elements? What about with them around? Done. And don't even get me started on this guy. It's millions of people making fit happen every single day, with no exceptions. The voices that say you can't, they'll all be there. But Fit doesn't care, and neither should you.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a special interview with Brent Leffell, Executive Chairman of TRX Training. We're talking live with Brent now out of California in the USA. Brent, welcome very much. How are things in the US?
Things are great. Thanks, Ross.
Let's look at you first, Brent. Of course, you've come into this with such a varied business background, but what was your journey to coming into the TRX brand? What was the kind of catalyst and the driver for you wanting to lead this company forward?
So great question. So I started, I'll spend maybe a quick minute on myself. I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and found my way to New York after college, and I was a banker. And I worked at what was Nations Bank. It became Bank of America, and I was one of the first guys when they started their investment bank, and then moved into private equity, and then spent a lot of years in private equity as a generalist. And back in 2005, I was working at a distressed firm, and we acquired Crunch from Valley. Crunch was a distressed, it was an orphan division of Valley at the time. And our investment thesis was that we had a big real estate group that we all like to work out, and that we thought this was a distressed asset that we can improve. And we got it wrong. And so after we acquired the company, literally, someday I'll write a book about everything that could go wrong, multiply it by 1,000, and that's what happened. And struggled through that for a few years and really didn't do a lot right. But the one thing I did do right, or at that time, the industry was, more of a cottage stage, learned a lot about it and said, wow, this has so much potential. It's so fragmented and there's so much growth potential. And then the smartest thing that I did is I met Mark Mastrove, Jim Rowley, and a guy named Mike Feeney. After they had exited 24 Hour, we became friends. They came in and looked at Crunch. They told me that there was, in different words, but there was tremendous opportunity to improve the operation. They started operating it. And then after a short period of time, we together, my old firm, Mark, Jim, and Mike, bought back our debt. We used that to restructure the company. And it was amazing. Overnight, we started doing really well. We launched the Crunch franchise business. That did well. And then I left my firm, joined them, and helped them start New Evolution Ventures. And that became a multi-branded health and wellness company. I was president, and I started off being in charge of the deals and the M&A and strategy and capital raising. And then I was fortunate enough to have, Mark and Jim take me under their wing, and I got more exposed to the operation and became, involved in a lot more of what we were doing, which led me to, ultimately spending a couple of years as CEO of UFC Gym, which was a company that was started by Mark and the former owners of the UFC that grew very rapidly. And then from that, after spending a couple of years doing that, I decided I wanted to get back into private equity, but in a different way, finding businesses, that I felt I knew that I had exposure to, and most importantly, that I knew people that could help influence it. And that led me to starting a boutique private equity firm with a partner called Equity 38. And then at the end of 2018, that led me to TRX. And I had been good friends with the founder, Randy Hetrick. And I always thought that is a great brand. When you go to Ursa, they had the best parties. They had the most people around the business. We were big customers. And what I admired most about the brand was just this big community of trainers that they built. And there was so much love for the brand, across the industry. And I thought, there's a big opportunity there to really, execute on a number of initiatives. And I always like to find companies where the brand is bigger than the company, and that was the case here. And I thought, there's an opportunity to, change that equation. But really, again, going back to what I liked the most was just the trainers and this huge community of trainers. And really it was a product company, that was disguised as this community of prosumers and consumers. So that's when I got involved back at the end of 2018.
Well, the TRX brand is a household name now. To your point, we know many master trainers in TRX, and they're quite fantastic people. I mean, they really are ambassadors in their own right for the brand. Let's look at your perspective in the market from both an investor and a financier. We've saw, of course, this kind of explosion into bricks and mortar, now an explosion into equipment manufacturers, and now into technology. Where is this investment drivers coming from? Do you think today is the best time for investors to come into the market? Are valuations still underpriced? Are companies still underexplored? What are your thoughts looking at this from an investor?
It's such a good question. I think that that I've looked at this whole sector evolve, over the course of the past almost 2 decades or a decade and a half. And this isn't really the question you're asking, but it's a question I've been asked, through this whole time period. Are we saying goodbye to brick and mortar fitness and everyone's going to work out at home, or the opposite? When we have a vaccine, is at home going to go away and the gyms are back and running, and there's this moment in time? And my response to that is that if you look at, I don't have the data, but I'm pretty sure this is true, that demand for fitness through this time period, it has grown, and that's a huge opportunity. And I think the consumption, of that is not defined, but I think what's happened is that this is accelerating what would have happened over 10 years, where, this hybrid model that everyone's speaking about, I really believe in that. And I think from that standpoint, as an investor, I think there's some turbulence right now, because what does this look like a year from now, right? And how do you pick the winners, and how do you value, everything is either undervalued or overvalued depending on how you look at it in the current time frame, because there's so much, choppiness. And I think a lot of it, at least the way that what we're doing, you got to have that long-term thesis, and then you have to, make sure that what you're doing, that there's a lot of cushion, so that you can navigate through the turbulence, and that you're setting up your capital structure properly, of the right liquidity. And, all of the, what you started this question with, my answer to each of them is yes, meaning technology, brick and mortar, at home. I think they're all going to thrive, and I think you're going to see some conversion. And I think we're already starting to see that happen with some of the deals, in the market that are either announced or that are, that there's rumblings that they are going to be announced.
You mentioned choppiness, you mentioned uncertainty. A lot of that is around the financial stability and the outlook for bricks and mortar gyms especially. Now, like you just said, you were part of NEV, its initial team. You've been heading up UFC gyms. You know the operations of these facilities here, Brent. What is the current challenges impacting operators at the moment in time? And do you think they're all going to be able to get through them in the coming term? And then dovetail into that would be, how are TRX helping them get through these challenges?
So great question. So I had the fortunate pleasure of gaining exposure to a lot of different, concepts all over the world. I'm still involved with, I'm still a board member at Barry's Boot Camp, and still a business on the East Coast called US Fitness with Kirk and John Galliani, who are, the former owners of Gold's. And, it's so interesting when you look at the challenges, what I look at really is culture and people with these businesses. And when we went through this, those businesses were flying, and they were growing and expanding. And when those businesses are all, the most important folks in those businesses are the people by far. That group fitness instructor, that personal trainer, the guy at the sales desk that's the mayor of the community where he's working, those types of folks. And a lot of them, they had to let them go. And so now I think one of the big issues that you have is, how do you get them back? And how do you kind of reinvigorate that culture that made it special, that made, folks light up when they come into the into that boutique fitness class or whatever it may be. I think that's one of the biggest challenges that operators are going to have over the next time period. On the financial side, it's the capital structure. A lot of businesses finance themselves. It was a red hot market, and a lot of the capital structures were they were financing growth that didn't yet happen, and that's a challenge. And I think that there's a lot of different ways to deal with that. But the one strategy I think is important is everyone has to be in it together, right? And the banks, what I've seen is when, everyone's, at the beginning of COVID and through it, I was involved in a couple of situations where everyone was pointing the guns at each other, and it's no one's fault what happened, right? And everyone, there's no bad actor. The bad actor is a virus, and everyone has to just band, together and try to get through it. And I think the key thing is just making sure that the capital structure makes sense, that you have runway and liquidity, because who knows what's going to happen, and that the opportunity is right for all constituents, that that there's a reason for people being and continuing on.
Now, one of the key trends we've saw in the past couple of years, Brent, has been this move, this shift to more functional training, being in clubs, being in facilities, also being enjoyed by members and consumers. What are your thoughts on the future of functional training? It has obviously evolved so much. There's been a lot of people now trying out new models and new practices throughout this COVID time, including a lot more outdoor training. But where does the future of functional fitness lie? What's going to stick going forward, and perhaps what trends might fade away?
Great question. I don't have the data, but over the past, I know the things I've been involved with over the past, call it decade, the percentage of floor space dedicated to functional training, and also just the functional training component of the equipment order when you're opening a gym is increased. And I think that functional training it's here to stay, and it's going to expand and continue. One of the issues is what to do, right? When you have a functional training tool, running on a treadmill is very straightforward. You turn it on and it doesn't require a lot of explanation. With these functional training tools, that's part of the issue, is that the consumer really has to understand, well, what do I do and how do I get an effective workout? And then once you figure that out, then there's that aha moment. And I think that what a lot of folks are doing, is with all the digital, fitness options, and with, all the trainers that are out there that are figuring out, what their next path looks like, they're going to help solve that issue for the consumer. So I think part of this is just it's an education issue. But I foresee over the next, period of time, tremendous growth in that becoming increasingly important in any fitness environment.
Now, you've always had such a big home marketplace. We always see TRX and outdoor boot camps and people's home gyms, etc. You always had that component to your business. Then, of course, you started to expand rapidly into B2B, into clubs and spas and hotels and the likes. Throughout COVID, of course, again, we saw this re-explosion of at-home fitness. How did that marketplace in the last maybe 12 months, how did that expand for you? Obviously, were you starting to see more customers wanting more larger pieces of your products?
We announced, so we are actually selling what we call a home gym, which is really, it's what we're selling into the commercial gym space that we've adapted for a home environment. And the way that started was really by accident. So at the beginning of COVID, we kept getting inbound inquiries from friends. Hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And it was really just evaluating what other folks were selling. And so we just said, hey, you know what? Like, we're doing that. And we actually have inventory because we're not selling a lot of that into, where it was meant to go because the gyms aren't open. So we started doing that on a very, kind of subscale, kind of word of mouth basis. We've started to share with the world that we are doing that, but it's really more of a, that hasn't become a primary business line for us. But what we've seen is that folks love it, and increasingly they started off just buying, some equipment to work out at home. And now they're, what we're seeing is folks are making investments in their home gym space. They may have bought a Peloton bike and they want to, expand it or whatever it may be. And so we're supporting that, and we're trying to figure out our path for the extent to which we want to support that.
TRX is a household name, as you just alluded to before, Brent. It's always been there at the front of people's minds in terms of community and engagement. Let's look at partnerships, which of course have never been more important in today's marketplace, enabling us to regrow and rebuild together. Looking forward, what type of partnerships are you looking to try and build upon, Brent? You've obviously had multiple partnerships across various ecosystems, but what works for you? What makes a good partnership? And can you give a couple of examples of what you're now doing?
In my past, I've had a lot of experience with partnerships, and I'd say that I've learned a lot of not what to do and what to do. Our business at NEV was a series of partnerships, and we did great. Part of a partnership is that very word. It's a partnership, and a partnership has to be it has to be positive, and it has to be aligned, and everyone has to win. And a lot of partnerships they fail at the first step because that doesn't happen. And second is simplicity, right? It has to be very clear, how a partnership works. And I know that in my training when I worked on Wall Street, I learned a lot about complexity, and I tried to apply that to some of the early partnerships that I worked on. And that's not the way. That's another kind of added thing that then you spend years explaining and correcting. So that's just a general viewpoint about how that works. But with TRx, partnerships is going to become a huge thing for us. We have a tremendous number of partnerships. We have partnerships with commercial gyms in over 60 countries that we sell to. We have partnerships with brick and mortar retailers. More and more, we've been getting involved with corporate wellness, and that's a huge aspect of our business. And one of the main objectives for that for us is to expand our audience and our reach. TRX has been built with not a lot of marketing spend, and it's really been grassroots. And through an effective partnership, you can ostensibly gain access to an audience through that partnership that you otherwise couldn't access, or that would cost a lot more money and be the return profile would be a lot different. So that's going to become more and more what we're doing. In terms of larger scale partnerships, we have done that too. So we announced late last fall that we established a partnership called Trx Elite. And what is Trx Elite? We partnered with a group that is comprised of a former special operations operator in the U.S. Army, and a group that came out of Exos, and that had been working with the U.S. government on some of their human performance. And why we set that up is because that's the origin of the TRX brand. Randy Hetrick was a Navy SEAL, and that's where he came up with the idea. And that business for us is very small relative to what we think it should be. And so we established that partnership because we felt that group could accelerate us much faster than try to build it on our own. So that's an example of a partnership that we would enter into, and we'll continue to do, to execute on those types of opportunities, but very cautiously, because, a partnership, once you get married, that changes the dynamics. And so that's one of the keys that we establish for everything that we do.
Now, as we come out of this pandemic, we're starting to see growth opportunities at the back of this, Brent. Looking ahead, maybe the next 1, 2, even 3 years, what milestones are you now chasing for TRX? What targets are on the horizon?
So great question. So first is that, TRX, one of the most important, what attracted me to TRX was this prosumer community, this community of trainers. And TRX has this education platform, and that's really what built the business. And one thing that we're very focused on is that whole group, as I mentioned, that's one of the biggest issues that the gym space has, is with labor, and how do you bring back labor, and what does the labor environment look like, in the next, as we get through this environment. And we want to support the trainers. And we're going to be launching and introducing a platform that we've been, working on behind the curtains that does just that. So that's one big initiative that we're working on. Second is an initiative that we're working on around the consumer. So, through this digital platform, we're going to be, offering something so that, we have a place where the consumer can train, whether it's in the gym, at home, whatever it may be. And we think that will also support not only the consumer, but all of our, commercial accounts. So those are big initiatives for us. And what it does is it really turns TRX into more of an ecosystem that can, continue to stay with our community beyond, taking that education course and or buying, making the initial strap purchase. So those are big initiatives for us. The other initiative for us is marketing. So as I mentioned, TRX hasn't spent a lot of money on marketing. We will be launching actually today, we launched, a brand campaign, and we're spending a tremendous amount of money telling the world about TRX. And one of the biggest issues with TRX is just that. It's what do you do with it? It looks cool, but that's a big initiative for us. And then third is just really expanding our distribution. Like right now we have, we truly are omni-channel. We sell into the commercial gym space, direct to consumer, which includes Amazon, our own e-commerce sites, and also brick and mortar. We're very under indexed internationally. International represents, less than 20% of revenue. And really that's what our opportunity is to, through the execution of the strategy, it's really to expand our distribution base and be able to, offer up this whole ecosystem that we feel we have.
Well, look, some exciting steps ahead, and we look forward to working with you on those, Brent. Let's turn the spotlight back on yourself. You've gone through some roller coaster crises in the past, no doubt, with the financial crisis itself. But let's look at this pandemic. What lessons, be it life, be it business, has this pandemic taught you over the past 12 to 15 months?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I've been reflecting on that quite a bit. And so, if you look back a year, which was the early stages of this, the first stage of this was crisis management and preparing for the unknown. And with everything that I was involved in, what we did is we did just that. We prepared as if it's going to be the unknown is going to be really bad, and prepare for the worst, and set each of the businesses up so that they can weather the storm, whatever that may be. And a lot of that's liquidity, and it was making tough choices around people and expenses. But then once that happened, it was figuring out, okay, well, where's the opportunity, and really trying to be smart and proactive around that. The other thing that I learned through this, which is a lesson not only through this, is you just have to keep going forward. You just have to keep marching ahead and don't quit. And that's as simple as it is. And also you have to be positive, right? And you just can't, and that's what each of our businesses, what we did our best is just to maintain that culture and, just be very open and honest, and, hey, I don't know what's going to happen, but we're going to do our best, and we're set up. And, that got us through, a lot of the initial stages of this whole thing. And now as we're coming out of it, I'm just reflecting back with all, and I'll think about my family. I have 2 young kids and my wife, and it was hard at the beginning. My wife actually started training in our garage doing TRX, and that changed her life. And now she's becoming a trainer, and she's doing all kinds of amazing things. And I have some other friends that have had those experiences either with TRX or other things that they've done. That's been great, because it was a moment when you were able to do those things that you wouldn't have otherwise done. So I think it's just, kind of reflecting, trying to see the good in, what's otherwise really challenging. But if I go back, it's setting everything up so that you can survive, then figuring out, okay, here's where the opportunities are. And then just don't be discouraged. Just keep powering through. Just march forward.
Now, aside from keeping your wife company in those workouts in the garage, what else have you been doing to keep yourself busy, your mind busy, your physical health, your mental health up through this crisis, Brent?
Yeah, it's a great question. Not enough. I've been set up so that, I as all of us do, have a lot of different, things that I'm trying to keep track of. And I also have, 2 young kids that I'm trying to, chase around and keep track of as well. That's really been most of my life. What I do is on Sundays, I go on a 2.5-hour hike with some friends by where I live. That's I do that every week, and it's, it's exercise, but it also clears my mind. And so I try to find something, which for me is physical activity, but an opportunity where I could just let my mind drift and just step away from whatever it is that I'm doing. And that's what I've, found for myself personally.